Teledentistry, what is it? Go to teledentistry.operadds.com to find out how you can completely change how we bring in new patients, giving them the ability to send photos and video before you ever talk to them. Go to teledentistry.operadds.com. Welcome to the Operatory, the podcast about burying the dinosaurs in dentistry, moving past outdated procedures, technology to find a better way. With me, as always, is the man, the myth, providing the most important patient perspective, David Pryor. How are you doing, sir?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be in the podcast studio with you today, sir. So for today's podcast, a little something different. I have a quote for us to dissect. Okay. This quote is not really dental related. It's probably more technology related, maybe more change related. We've been working a lot on our upcoming platform that'll probably be launched, actually will be launched by the time this podcast airs, which is upgradedental.com, which is focused on how to implement anything in your practice. And so I have a quote from an early 19th century German philosopher today, Arthur Schopenhauer.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Laskin.
I practiced Schopenhauer. I said it without screwing it up. So that's great. So, sir, are you ready for the quote?
Yeah, hit
Now, I've got to change I'm not going to change the quote, but I have to define that because, back in 1818 when this dude was writing, he was talking about transformation, but he calls it truth. Okay, so if you think of the word truth as transformation, or maybe I'll make that. It's kind of a buildup, isn't it?
Yes.
Dave's sitting on the edge of his seat over here.
I'm sure our audience is right along with me.
All right. You ready for some?
Yeah, hit me.
1820s philosophy, man?
Yeah, I am ready.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
All truth transformation passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. Third, it's accepted as self-evident. I thought that was worthy of a prize. I read that and I was like, that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah. No, I can get behind that.
So I wanted to dissect it because I right now we like creating change, right?
Well, I'd like to spend a little time on the ridicule part for you, but we can move past that.
Is this personal ridicule?
Yeah, no, personal ridicule.
Okay, so you're stuck in stage 2. Is that what you're thinking? Just perpetually walking through life. Yeah. I get it. But I think it's true in dentistry too. I think that new technologies. I remember way back in the day when I was in dental school, and I saw the Cerac 2, which was like a wheel and like a block of and people ridiculed it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Then I actually was adopting the technology about 18 years ago. And boy, I remember people, like when I was talking about it and there was, telling people how much it costs and whatever, It was violently opposed. And people were like, oh my gosh, it's never going to be as good as my lab technician is he's the best. I fish with him every weekend and he's the greatest. And now I think we're in the stage with CAD/CAM that it's being accepted as self-evident. So I thought that's which is interesting because I'd love to hear your perspective as a patient, because I don't know if patients would also be the same way. The transformation that we go through, providing technology, incorporating new procedures into our practices. If the patients, I don't think patients are ridiculing technology or violently opposing it. It's a unique phenomena, I think, for those who are actually needing to go through the change, to actually go through the transformation. Others don't go through those phases.
Well, I think that you're right. I don't think that the patients know what technologies exist in dentistry, but I think that you're right. I mean, and the whole reason we have this podcast is to talk about the fact that technology advances in anything, any sort of change.
Right? Yeah.
Any sort of change begins with people rejecting it, right? And like the old standard is this way, and I'm used to that, so my way is right. And being open, I think our society today really struggles with taking the opportunity to be wrong and make mistakes.
You're wrong.
Obviously, I'm wrong. My life is full of wrongness. But I mean, I think that, I know you are like, embrace it. I know you'll jump on something to give it a try and see if it's going to be a great technology or if it's a flop. And even if it is a flop, you'll see what benefits can you get out of a particular subject or material or technology, anything that you love taking a look at new stuff that comes out.
Well, I think that there's those of us that, I mean, obviously, the great 19th century philosopher from Germany, Arthur Schopenhauer, was the same, because they even come up with the quote, right? You've got to be a fan and go look. Everybody else ridiculed it and violently opposed it, and then they accept it as being, oh, of course that was the way it was going to be.
Right.
And it's the same thing. I don't know if I've shown you. There's a YouTube video that shows how to start a movement, and it shows like a bunch of people watching a band, and like they're just sitting there. Then one guy gets up and he's dancing around, and everybody's like pointing at him and laughing at him because he's kind of the idiot jumping around, right?
Yeah.
And then a few other people come up, and then it's like then at one point there's a tipping point where everybody's dancing, right?
Sure.
But at first he was being ridiculed. And I think it's the same thing is true of other technologies, whereas the band was probably just like, oh my gosh, thank God one guy's dancing, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different perspective. I think that's really what I wanted to point out with this is it's a very different perspective from patients and from the practice side. And when you're looking at any new technology, any new procedure, incorporating change, try to look at it from the patient's perspective, which is you're exactly right. That's why we have this podcast,
right? Because
anything that's new is going to look weird to most people first,
yeah,
right.
Yep.
And then the violent opposition probably comes from resisting change, right? Mm-hmm. Not because they're really violently opposed to it. I mean, I think of just a couple months ago, there were pickup trucks that were like blocking off the Tesla superchargers. I mean, that's like violently opposing change, and right. I mean, yeah. And then probably 10 years from now, you won't even be able to buy gas at a gas station. Well, not 10 years, but 20 years, right? So it's the same kind of thing. So I think the sort of pearl that you exposed from this oyster of a quote, Dave, is that the truth, the transformation that we bring to our practices, you can expect, I think, not just yourself, but think of your team too. I think there's a lot of change death that happens because a team member violently opposes something that's in everybody's best interest, right?
Yeah.
So instead of asking your team, which oftentimes they're going to be violently opposed, even if it's a great idea, ask your patients.
Yeah. Well, and I know, having known you for as long as I have, you've definitely been in a situation in your practice where staff members have opposed changes that you've put forward. And because you're always, decisive, once you make a decision, you just move forward. And the decision's made, now we're moving on to the next step. And so I think that it's a really good lesson for a lot of dentists. I talk to a lot of dentists in my job now, and it's really hard watching them try to struggle with convincing the staff that something is going to be a great change for them, and the staff being resistant to it.
Well, and oftentimes the change is great for them.
Always.
But not always. Here's the reality, is that oftentimes there's changes that are important for your company, for your business, for your patients, that might not be important for that individual. And guess what? Suck it up.
Right.
It's in the best interest. Ultimately, it's in your best interest because it's in the best interest for where you work, right? And for the patients, and why we're here is best for you, right? But it might cause you, Sally, to do extra work, and that's okay because that's your job.
Well,
right?
I was at a sales seminar one time, and this speaker got up and started out by saying, all change is good. And I know everybody's sitting on the other end of this podcast going, no, that's not true. But if you start thinking about it...
On the other side of the desk, by the way.
On the other side of the desk, too. But what he meant when he said this was that change to expose what could be is always a great opportunity to learn. So you can always go back to the way you've been doing things, but to change things and to see what the other opportunities are almost always benefits you.
Yeah, you're gonna make me cry. That's so beautiful. That's wonderful. I was just there's no failure, right?
Right.
There's success and learning.
Right.
Right.
Exactly, and that was his point.
Yeah, totally. So to wrap up this podcast, I'll just read the quote again. So think of your team members that have gone through these processes, and maybe yourself. That all truth and transformation pass through 3 stages: being ridiculed, second, violently opposed, and third, accepted as self-evident. So, as Dave wisely pointed out today, the patients don't go through the same thing. So it's always best, I believe, to first look at things from patient's perspective, which is why you're here. So thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
I also want to remind you to rate and review us wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you have suggestions or comments, please visit theoperatory.com and drop us a line. Again, I'm Dr. Bryan Laskin, host of The Operatory. Thanks for listening. I look forward to speaking with you next week.